What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video about the mighty LS. So coming off the last LS video that I did, I had a few comments of people wanting me to talk about sort of what the weak points of the LS are and what we would normally upgrade sort of straight off the bat. It didn't really fit what I wanted to do with the last video, so I didn't put it in there, and the last video was already sort of long enough, so I thought I'd make another video about sort of what we look at upgrading straight off the bat, depending on your sort of application for what you want to do with the motor. So I know LSs isn't everyone's cup of tea. The last video I put out got like 5 dislikes straight up. People just obviously not liking LSs. Like I said, I don't care if people not like them, that's fine, but they are such a great motor. So we'll talk about exactly what we sort of look at upgrading straight off the bat. Now, first and foremost, which is probably not a surprise to anybody, is the camshaft. So the stock LS camshafts are obviously more aimed at the market of, you know, more economical sort of smooth operation. They are not great for the potential of what these things can actually do. So pretty much with every single LS you've ever seen, the first thing that gets done is a new cam gets whacked in. So I reckon there's probably a lot more LSs around with aftermarket cams than there are stock cams in the world. Absolutely, definitely. So obviously, making power NA, especially with a single cam motor, your cam choice is it is absolutely imperative that you choose the right cam for your setup and what you want to do. So there's a little bit of sort of nutting out and you know, calculations and stuff that goes into choosing the right cam for what your application is. And again, that depends on what heads you're running, what sort of flow you're getting, your intake, what pipes you've got. You know, there's so much stuff that depends on camshaft. You know, whether you run boost or, you know, there's heaps of stuff in there that determines what cam you're going to actually choose. So that's always first thing to pretty much get upgraded. The other thing is goes hand in hand with that is the valve springs. So the stock LS valve springs are renowned for being horrible. Once again, more aimed at, you know, pairing with that cam where everything's nice and smooth and economical, and not loading up the valve train too hard with some heavy springs. So that's always first to go. The stock LS springs don't have very good seat pressure at all. Pretty much any sort of upgraded cam with extra lift, you are going to need to upgrade the springs. Even if you wanted to leave it stock cam and just put some boost into the motor, the seat pressure sort of isn't there to hold a lot of boost. There are plenty of people out there that do run sort of up to around 10 pound on the stock valve springs, but you can see it on the power graph when the valve springs are starting to get pretty unhappy, because your sort of power just starts to dip off at RPM because your valve springs just can't keep that seat pressure and keep those valves shut. So yeah, it's very common to float valves and stuff on the stock springs, so that usually goes hand in hand with upgrading the cam. And the great thing about doing that with these LS motors is that cam and spring package can be done in the car. It can be done with the heads on the engine. You don't actually have to remove the heads to do that. They make plenty of tools around where, you know, you can actually pressurize the cylinder to keep the valves up. And like we've got tools here, the LS valve tools, where you can actually you know, use them to compress the valve spring and actually change the springs while it's in the car. So that's a really good general straight up upgrade that you do. Another thing with the LSs, particularly the LS1s, is the stock lifters. The stock hydraulic lifters are very prone to failure. You know, they're very prone to collapse, which can cause you a lot of problems, which are not very much fun. So usually when we do a cam and valve train package, we're trying to coerce people into doing lifters as well. It's definitely a very good idea. The problem with that is you have to remove the heads to do lifters. So yeah, the advantage is you can do cam and springs without removing the heads. You can do it in the car. But to do your lifters, you have to remove the heads. There's no two ways about it. There's no way around it. You have to remove the heads. So that's usually what we try and do in a cam and spring package for like a mild street sort of engine. So the other thing with the LS ones, or actually all the LS families, sorry, is they have in the rockers, they have a needle roller trunnion sort of bearing. So this is an upgraded trunnion, which we have done ready for our drift motor here. So this is going in our Drift R31 Skyline, and this has had a trunnion upgrade kit installed. So what that is you press out the needle roller bearing in the stock, that is the stock trunnion, and you actually put in a solid, it's not brass, I forget what it's called. Rex actually knows what the metal's called. It's a hard metal, but it's pretty much a solid bush. So the issue you get with the needle roller bearings is that obviously needle rollers are very, very small little pieces of metal. and they have a tendency to walk out of the bearing race has a tendency to walk out at high RPM. And if you have a trunnion fail, like a stock needle roller trunnion fail, it's going to scatter all those needle rollers through your engine, which is essentially game over. It's very, very bad for your motor. So that is a good idea, particularly if you are going to have a high RPM application for your motor. So things like drifting and that, we always recommend a trunnion upgrade. Again, can be done with the motor in the car or whatever, but yeah, that's definitely something else we sort of try and push people to do if they're going to be using the engine for high RPM applications. And that there is more or less pretty much all there is as far as keeping the motor aspirated. Generally we just use stock GM head gaskets. They have a really nice stock multi-layer steel gasket, much like a Toyota, which are really good. So generally for just an aspirated application, we'll just use a new set of GM stock head bolts. But that's pretty much it as far as your upgrades for a naturally aspirated application. It's going to keep everything quite reliable, and you know, with a cam, lifters, springs, trunnion upgrade, and a decent tune depending on your cam selection, and obviously your intake and your pipes, and there's a few other things in there. But you know, you can achieve up to sort of 400 plus horsepower on 98, and it's very, very simple and pretty easy to do with a good tune. So you know, it's hard to argue with that. As far as going to boosted setups, again, stock GM head bolts if they're new. You know, if you want to run up to sort of that 10 psi, that's usually pretty good. Again, the stock GM multi-layer steel head gaskets are really quite good for boost also. Once you start approaching that 10 psi and over, obviously this changes with your cam selection, how much cylinder pressure is actually made on boost. So I should probably not be using a PSI as a relative term, but more so a horsepower figure. So if you're going just chasing over that sort of 500 wheel horsepower with boost, we'll upgrade to an ARP head bolt. You know, the ARP head bolts are a really good clamping force, and we'll keep going up until sort of that 600, 650 sort of mark. Over that, you want to go to some good studs, like a really nice stud setup. So with boosted applications also, we'll generally put a high volume oil pump on it. High volume oil pump is sort of just there to help, obviously, with your oil feed for your turbo and a few other ancillary things that you're going to have on the car that comes with a boosted setup. Again, you can put a high volume pump on an A motor if you like, but again, with any motor, upgrading that oil pump really has a lot to do with what your intended purposes for the motor are. So once again, like I talked about with this engine in videos of us building this engine, because we plan on using this engine for a drift purpose, it is always going to be quite a high RPM motor. It's always going to be spending a lot of time in the higher RPM range, which obviously by nature of a crane driven oil pump means that you're going to be pumping a lot of oil. So if you've got a stock capacity sump and you're using it for drifting, if you whack a high volume oil pump on it where you're pumping even more oil and your motor's always at high RPM, what you're going to have is just an oversupply of oil and the risk of actually draining the sump dry, which is not exactly what you want. So for our drift motors and stuff like that, and high RPM motors that are NA, we just like to stick to the stock volume oil pump. And you know, being at that high RPM, it's always got plenty of oil flow anyway, and you have less risk of actually draining the sump if you're using a stock volume sump, or stock capacity sump I should say, sorry. Obviously with doing the cam package, it's always, we try always to do a new timing chain. The problem with the timing chain setup is that the oil pump sits, or the oil pump is driven off the front of the timing chain gear. So when you do the cam upgrade, if you're trying to do the cam swap sort of in the car and just do a quick sort of cam and springs package, it presents a bit of an issue with the timing chain, because to change the timing chain, you actually have to take the oil pump off the motor, because the oil pump is actually driven off the front of the timing gear on the crank. So it really just depends how many Ks are on the motor as to whether that needs to be done. There's nothing particularly wrong with the LS timing chains, it's just that they do need to be changed at, you know, X amount of 100 Ks, I suppose. This one, when we pulled this engine down, the timing chain was very, very sloppy. It was definitely due for changing. Obviously, if the motor's out of the car, that's very easy to do. Going to a double row timing chain kit, some people swear by them. It does give you that little bit of extra insurance, but it's not particularly necessary. Obviously, the bigger you go with the cam and the heavier you go with your valve springs, the more you're loading up the camshaft, which sort of, that's when you start to run into, you sort of want to have that extra timing chain on it, that dual row, just for the extra forces that are happening on the cam loading it up. But we find generally, if you're doing like something moderate springs, sort of fairly big cam. We just run a good single timing chain setup, and we have not so far had many issues. There are a lot of people that swear by upgrading the push rods. Personally, obviously, unless we have to change lengths, we don't really particularly see the need for it. The push rods in the stock LS motors are quite light, they're quite a thin wall. But that being said, the forces on the push rod essentially are always straight up and down, unless you're doing, you know, there are instances where I've seen people bend push rods, mostly just put it down to bad luck, massive RPM. Sometimes it's wrong preload. There's a lot of things in there, but we personally have not yet had a stock push rod bend or fail. But once again, it depends on how hard you plan on loading up the springs, or you know, the cam, that push rod area on the lifter, based on how heavy the cam springs are and how big the camshaft is really. So that's a pretty basic rundown on the sort of the off the bat upgrades that we do to LSs, or pretty much all the upgrades to do to the LSs. Like I said, these motors are actually very simple. What I've talked about, by the time you upgrade your cam lifters, your valve springs, your trunnions, you've almost done everything. Like, there's not actually much more to these motors. So that's pretty much it. They're very easy to make power out of, and once you do some of these key upgrades, they're super reliable. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Hope that answers a lot of your questions about what we actually sort of look at upgrading just to make these things sort of reliable. Once again, it always comes down to the application or your planned application for the engine as to what you want to look at upgrading. So, you know, like a mild street engine, you don't need to do all this work. A mild street engine where you're not going to be doing massive RPM, you don't particularly need a Trunnion upgrade. It is good insurance, just like pretty much every modification there is. There's a lot of it you don't need, but it's always good insurance. But yeah, with just you know, cam lifters, springs, and a good tune, you're looking at sort of 400 horsepower. That's pretty awesome. So thanks for watching, guys. As always, smash like, smash subscribe. Please don't dislike this video just because you don't like LSs. And we'll see you on the next one. Cheers, guys. Catch you later.